So we'll give it a couple of seconds to let the attendees file in, and then we'll start it.
There's a little bit of background noise.
Yeah, that is interesting. All right, let me I'll just jump straight in and start it now. Um, Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our kickoff webinar for our second Innovageing Insights series. I'm Merlin Kong, Head of Innovageing and Principal Advisor for Innovation at Leading Edge Services Australia, and I'll be your host today. I'm delighted to have Prue Densley from St. Vincent's Care Services and Michael Momsen from Rated join us today. We're going to be talking about their experiences and insights, essentially moving from, in a project that they work together, essentially moving from anecdote to data to better design of services. So that's a really interesting topic, and we're really keen to jump straight into that. But before we do so, for those of you who are new to Innovageing, or if this is your first Innovageing event, we're Australia's national innovation network for the age services sector. We operate from LASER's Center for Workforce Development and Innovation. We are a network that is open to everyone that is interested in age services innovation, and this is essentially made possible with support from the Commonwealth Government and our incredible network partners, and they are our foundation partners, the Commonwealth Bank and KPMG Australia, and also our goal partners, plus communities and content labs. Now, couple of housekeeping details or information. The format for today, Prue and Michael will speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll transition on to another 20 minutes for a Q&A. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded and you'll be on mute during the session. That said, I strongly encourage you to ask questions and share your insights during the course of this webinar. Please do that with the chat function on Zoom. I'll try to get through as many questions as I can today, but if I don't get to yours, feel free, and if you really want an answer to that question, feel free to email events@laser.asn.au. Now, if you didn't manage to write that down or get that, not to worry. After today's webinar, there'll be a post-webinar email that will go out to you. It would have that email address, and we'll also have a link to a recording of today's session. So, Prue and Michael, are you ready?
Sure.
Okay, without much further ado, over to the both of you.
Great. Thank you so much, Merlin, and wonderful to be here. So Prue and I will co-host our story. And in terms of what we'll run through, we'll just briefly introduce ourselves, and Prue will share some of the challenges that were sparked by the pandemic around both visitor management and understanding what the customer experience is, and how families have felt through this process. And then we'll talk about how we co-designed a solution and were able to implement that, and what some of the results Prue and the team at St. Vincent's have seen. And then we can give you a bit of an insight as to how we're thinking about the ongoing evolution of this journey as well. So brief introduction for myself. Run a company, Rated and Zipline, and we really make it very easy for organizations to capture the voice of the customer, whether that's via an email or giving some feedback in the moment. And we've been working with the aged care sector really closely since the Royal Commission and the importance of understanding the customer experience and having that linked to the aged care standards. And then obviously now with the pandemic, the challenges around screening visitors, contractors and staff. And we'll take you through that. And that's our Zipline journey. And that's a little bit of introduction to me.
Hi, everyone. I'm Prue Densley. I head up the customer experience department at St. Vincent's. Just coming on my 1-year anniversary at St. Vincent's, and back this time last year, pre-COVID, was tasked with setting up a customer experience department and team. So took the first kind of couple of months just to kind of get us understanding of where we were, and kind of January onwards started to really ramp up building a customer experience team with nothing to start with. So that always poses a fun challenge, and little did I know COVID was just around the corner. Fun times. So in terms of kind of where we were at, no surprises, I think, from an aged care perspective. Really that kind of head and heart trying to balance budgets and then keeping your residents, families and staff happy. It's a constant battle, and it has, and then dialed up to 11 when the pandemic came. As I mentioned, when we started, before we met Zipline, everything was anecdotal. We kind of knew that we were okay and that the families really liked what we did and our care was great, but we didn't have any hard data. I could not put my hand on my heart and stand in front of the board and say, this is what people are saying. I had no reporting, no data, no access to anything. And in terms of kind of from a visitor perspective, pre-COVID, we would let anyone come anytime, anywhere, from any building door entry to any of our facilities. It was very manual, if at all, and posed huge risk to us across all of our facilities. So when COVID hit, trying to negotiate state and site-specific visitor management manually with multiple staff became a complete nightmare. It was really hard in those early days. And that obviously posed a real challenge to us. So the budgets kind of went out the window because we were having to resource reception 7 days a week. Pre-COVID, we were a 5 days a week, Monday to Friday type reception, and anybody could do anything come weekends, which sounded a little bit crazy. But come pandemic, we were then 7 days a week, and resourcing was temp staff and agency who you had to train each day and each week on the challenges of COVID. So it kind of gives you a bit of perspective of where we were, probably very similar to many others. In terms of entering Rate It, in terms of that relationship, as I mentioned, back in the February, March, when COVID was kind of around, but not really that serious, we met up with Rate It, and early days speaking with Michael about really helping us to understand and get a handle on our customer experience and building that baseline. They were the very early stages that we had started to think about how Rate It could potentially help us to really understand where to go to from here. So that cue, Rate It, comes into our life kind of March, April time.
Right. So one of the things I want to highlight when sharing the story in terms of as we've learned about these problems and how we've gone about supporting St. Vincent's and the team, it's really a wonderful story of co-design. And I know a lot of the folks in the aged care industry are now talking a lot about modern co-design, but really, really proud to explain, in this story. And I think there's so many wonderful opportunities in your organization as well, to bring in the right partners to work together to solve, some of the challenges that you have in terms of in a modern digital way. And so when we were working with Prue, we really started with getting a baseline. So how do we understand the voice of the customer, Net Promoter Score? Let's think about the right times to ask questions of families and residents and so forth. And what are the right questions to ask? And how do we make the reporting really simple? So that was the journey that we kicked off. And then in late March, Prue said, hey, this visitor management thing's really becoming a pain for us. The customer experience program is important, but this is a burning platform. Can you guys help? And we sort of thought about it and said, well, we don't really have a visitor management solution ready to go. However, we've got all the right building blocks. We've got an app, we've got this, we've got that, and we've got a mature team. But before diving in, we wanted to understand the problem a bit more to make sure that we could be impactful. And so, any kind of good co-design story starts with asking lots of questions. And we didn't just say, cool, no worries, we'll start coding up all these features. We really spent a lot of time to understand the challenges. And we saw the visitor restrictions, were changing. It was different by state, from no visitors to only one visitor per resident per day, no more than 2 hours. Some families are saying open up more, some are saying close down. There's the squeaky wheels, but is that really a reflection of how we're doing? And then how to manage like people showing up without a pre-booking, and there's only X number of people in that wing, but in another site we can have more. So this is all really, really quite tough. And then we spoke to a range of other providers, and they were all saying something similar, like they were all very, very similar challenges. And so then we started our journey with Prue and the team of building a pre-booking engine that was very much from the ground up, built with the rack restrictions in mind. So you could go in and say, we can have 3 family groups per hour between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. at this site in this wing or this floor. And you could play with all those restrictions. Kids are allowed, now they are not allowed. All of this would be in a dynamic pre-booking engine supporting both phone calls and families pre-booking. And then when they would come on site, 3 things would need to turn green. Obviously, the flu back would need to be on file, healthcare declaration, and temp. So that's where we started with Prue. And then we tracked customer experience feedback after that, which was really helpful to understand what did families think about the COVID safety measures as they were coming in and out and having these visits. And as we started working with other providers, we realized that automating the experience was really, really important. So the pre-booking, critical, but there are also times in a less restricted environment where you want to support walk-ins, and then it's therefore automating that process as opposed to having additional contingent staff or administrative staff carry that burden. And so this is where we started automating the sign-in process, and we have thermal imaging based into the device, and could make that sign-in experience completely seamless on site, as well as some friendly SMS reminders if they didn't have their flu back on file, or making sure that they leave on time, as well as a bunch of real-time reporting. One of the really cool things we did with Prue and the team was when we could digitally see everyone coming in and out of the building and seeing who's visiting who. Not only can you get some good feedback about that experience, but you can really see some interesting trends that you might know, you may have a sense of, but because there's people changing shifts and there's so much going on, we could see who gets the most visits and the least visits over a period of time. And I know the St. Vincent's team were then able to organize some special programs for those that got the least visits. So, that's an example of how we were able to understand the problem and work together on solving it. And since then, we're really, really proud to now have 30 people full-time dedicated to just solving this problem for residential aged care. And we're hiring another 14 now, and integrating into key sort of rack solutions like Epicor, etc. And since launching with Prue in earlier this year, we're now live with many, many locations, and now the sort of #1 automated screening solution for rack providers, and have screened now hundreds and thousands of rack visitors automatically. And it's now being deployed in hospitals. And even our friend Richard Colbeck wrote us a nice letter, praising the innovation. So this isn't because we, thought of all these features and built some great software. This was only possible because of the deep relationship with Prue and the team at St. Vincent's, and really understanding those challenges and going through that co-design process. So that's a little bit about our journey and how we came about, building some of these great digital solutions. Prue, maybe you can share some of the results that you've since experienced from going live.
Yeah, sure. So within those first 3 months, so we, for context, I think we rolled out trial sites at 2 or 3 facilities, and then within 2 weeks, we scaled to all 20. So within that first 3 months, we were able to see the number of bookings that we were able to facilitate in terms of COVID safe visits. So that 16,000 came through in that first 3 months. Now that was bookings that would have been 16,000 phone calls, 16,000 people turning up unannounced, 16,000 headaches that the visitor booking system enabled us to solve, and we did them safely. So fascinating. And to Michael's point before, you kind of thought you knew your business until you see the reports that 11 o'clock is the time across nationally is the peak time for visitors to come. We never knew that before. We now know Thursdays at 11 is the day to be visiting our sites. In terms of the relationship, early days as we were making those tweaks to the COVID rules, we would ask the visitors post their visit, are we on the right track? Getting a pulse check instantly from people gave us that sense that we were doing the right thing. So 93% of people were saying, yep, you're spot on, keep doing what you're doing. So it made sure that we weren't listening to the squeaky wheels, we were listening to the consensus of the whole. And we were asking them in those early days too, what do you actually think of this booking system? And 96% were like, yep, love it. It makes it easier. At least I know that I'm booked in and I'm not going to get turned away at the door, which was what was happening early days.
What's been really interesting there with other providers, a lot of people are worried about, an elderly audience wanting to use technology to pre-book. But what we've seen is over 70%, once they start using it, actually prefer pre-booking digitally rather than calling up. So there may be a little bit of apprehension to begin with, but once it's really easy, if you can use Facebook on your phone, is what we say, you can use a simple pre-booking engine, and it gives them a lot of certainty that they can see, okay, there's 3 slots left on Saturday at 11 o'clock. Okay, great, I can book in. And if they need to change it, they can change it. And so that was a wonderful surprise and a learning here, is just how well, the take-up's been with families.
Yeah, there's that assumption that a 70-year-old isn't going to want to go online to book, but that squashed those assumptions. In terms of efficiency, again, we were able to use the Zipline functionality and worked with Radar in those early days, especially those first kind of really crunchy 3 months, where we did a pulse check to staff as well, because we wanted to know exactly what they were feeling, in addition to knowing what the families and visitors were feeling. So we did a couple of pulse checks with staff to get a sense of, do they think we're on the right track? So that was really useful as well, data that we wouldn't have been able to grab that quickly. And in terms of benefits, we have reached out to our frontline staff to ask, pre-Zipline, when everything was manual, and to now, what's the change happened? And the frontline staff are reporting on average about 12 hours of time saving a week. The system has helped them. And 100% of our senior leaders are absolutely loving the system. The fact that we have data now that we can bring to any meeting, any board report, to give them a good sense of what's happening on the ground when everyone's virtual has been invaluable. It's 100% helped give us confidence that we're going the right way, and 100% compliant. I'm sure many of you would have had the surprise visits from the Commission, and we were able to pull reports instantly and to give them that sense that we are actually abiding by rules and regulations, and we are following the guidelines in a safe way. So that is always good to keep yourselves out of trouble from the Commission's perspective. And not that it's all about awards, but I think from our perspective, it gave us a real kick hot off the press last Friday. Rate It and St Vincent's collectively took out a prize for this system. So we're a bit chuffed about that, very surprised. But again, just the innovation and this co-design that Michael and his team have walked alongside to help us solve this problem has been really great experience for us, and has given us confidence to now look at what else we can do to fix from a digital sense. So we continually every week say to Michael and team, can you fix this? And can you fix that? So it's a really great relationship.
We love it. Send all your problems our way, and we can't necessarily fix all of them, but where there's industry themes, that's exactly what we love getting into. And just as a sneak peek to finish on, something that we're working on now is, and we'll have this very, very soon, is a completely contactless and using Face ID for authentication. So, going up, hi Michael, welcome back. We just checked your temperature. We know your flu vac's already on file. We just need to confirm, the changing screening questions, you're all good. And then being able to just walk in straight away for staff, contractors, and visitors. So, really excited to have this, as well as the ability to opt in or out, because some people may not want to have facial recognition being used, even though it doesn't store, photos. It's got a way of not saving photos, but some may say, actually, I don't want to. I'd rather put in my phone number. That's no problem. So doing that in a really privacy-centric way is really exciting. And the other thing that we're hearing is, the tour booking experience becomes really important, as we go through the pandemic, ensuring that your occupancy rate remains really high. So, they're just not a normal visitor. That's a VIP experience that you need to get right. So how do you have a booking for a tour on your website? Maybe it automatically looks in consultants' calendars to see when they're free. Have that in, a separate text message, and, capturing some feedback after a tour, how likely are you to proceed with this? really, really valuable data. We're hearing from a lot of other rack providers that this provides a good opportunity to digitize the contractor compliance. So a range of contractor compliance records that are kept manual. And there's also things like, hey, could we maybe have an automated system confirm that you're allowed to come in and it automatically triggers and opens a door? That's something that we're working on right now, and really excited about where we can take this when digitally who's coming in and out of the building and they're compliant, and if how they're feeling and what that experience is. There's a whole range of other things that we can layer on top of that. So we're really, really excited about committing ourselves to supporting residential aged care and really understanding the unique challenges that are here, and then building the right partnerships and software that really makes an impact.
No,
that's what we have to take you through. I look forward to throwing it open for any questions or discussion.
Yeah, no, that's thanks for that presentation. That was excellent. I've got a couple of questions that have come up from the window. And look, I guess the first one, and it's something that's near and dear to Innovageing, is looking at this connection between organizations and technology adoption. So in this context here, with the presentation that we've just had, there's element of data, there's element of technology being used, and there's also the element of staff being comfortable to use it. So really keen to learn from the both of you, what was the process in getting staff to accept the technology, be comfortable working with the technology, and not be afraid of data?
Sure. I'll jump in first. From our perspective, I mentioned very briefly, but in the very early days when we wanted to launch with it, we found the greatest experience is to get a couple of pilot sites and get them comfortable, because nothing says it's going to be okay if your buddy in the next facility down the road has been through the pain already. So we picked a couple of sites on purpose. We picked a really challenging, sprawling, huge site and a small site, and just to get a mix up. And Rate It kind of walked alongside us. We did 2 or 3 video, because this is peak COVID, video conferencing, where we took people through the learning. I think the tool sells itself in that it's just so simple. Once people got online and saw it, were able to play with them themselves, it made it a whole lot easier. So we did training, and then a follow-up training session. We did some videos that we sent out, and enabled those couple of sites 2 weeks of just getting inside the app and trying to use it. Then we came back together and had a debrief: what worked, what didn't work. If you were the guys at Rate It, what would you fix? What would you add? And so from that, we were able to then gain really good insights of what else the guys needed to add on our giant wish list. And once we were comfortable with that, and we did some tweaks, we scaled, added another 10 sites, I think, roughly, and then just jumped in and added everybody else in, because the feedback was, it's actually really easy to use and it's solving a whole lot of pain. So we found the adoption surprisingly quick. I did think I was going to get a lot of resistance, but we took it baby steps at the beginning and just continued to give people the chance to play and be okay to break it if they could, and they didn't. So yeah. So it was fine from our perspective. I don't know about you guys, Michael.
Yeah, I think there's 3 themes that come that stand out on our side. I think the first thing is, before you sign off on new technology, ideally have the people who are going to use it and the frontline team have them bought in. Previously, we obviously moved really quickly early on at the pandemic, but most of the conversations that we have now, if the rack provider doesn't proactively bring in their frontline team members before signing, we actually recommend it. We did this recently with Sundale, with Southern Cross Care, a whole heap of providers, and we've said, look, bring your residential aged care site managers to the demo. Bring the people that are going to be administratively running this. And at the end of that session, usually there's this chorus of, oh my God, when can we get this? Let's start now. And that also gives, the executives confidence that it's not, sort of just a strategic, nice fit. So that's the first thing. The second one is, when you do go live and launch, having a really clear project and launch plan. And one of the things that we've done is we've templatized that, so there's sort of no stress on the RAC provider to having to roll that out and sort of being able to roll it out remotely. So lots of really good training for people that can't join the training, videos that are available, has been really important. And then the third element is the local support and the engagement. And different organizations say, well, our IT team can maybe be the first layer. Others say, hey, can the Zipline team cover everything? But we really, really enjoy having the direct frontline engagement, because if they say, oh, we're having a challenge with this, or what about this? We had one provider say, oh, actually, how do we ensure that people leave on time after 2 hours? Maybe the reception could get a notification to ensure that people leave. And we said, rather than building that feature, why don't we send a text message to the person 10 minutes before to ensure that they leave on time, so you don't having to have an RN ensure that people are leaving on time. They're like, oh, that's great. And we never would have been able to build features like that if we're not close to the front line. So I think the people using the software, that they feel comfortable in reaching out directly and having a local team support and really have that relationship is what then allows us both at a strategic layer to get things right, with Prue and the executive team, but also the teams that are working and using it every day. That's where we kind of get that continuous improvement flywheel cranking.
Okay. All right then. Thanks for that. I guess a second question that would be quite interesting to get some feedback on also is from that data governance standpoint. So with regards to this project, how do we go from, let's say, data governance, data maintaining privacy and security, and also how do we go from generating the data from anecdotal insights to actually using that data to design services or take on board suggestions that visitors or clients or residents might have? It's a big question, isn't it? It's pretty broad.
I guess from my perspective, if I kind of break it down into a simple example, and Michael touched on it before, once we started to capture the information that we didn't have, sharing it back to the group that were using the booking system really opened their eyes into, one, making sure that they then used it, because data in, you get to have really great data out. Yeah. And then asking the questions, well, what does this tell you? Do we think we need to have reception 7 days a week if now we know that everyone comes on a Monday or a Sunday? So using that to have questions really empowers the staff to help solve problems. And the example that Michael showed earlier of, once we started to track all the people that were getting visits, it actually helped the lifestyle team to know, so there's a big bunch of our residents that don't get any visitors. Let's actually focus an activity or activities around that group of people. They kind of knew before, but now that we had the data and the facilities manager could see that, they could point and direct their staff to focus on that. So that kind of level of information, giving that back from my perspective, back to the sites and to the staff there, really empowered them to then want to do more, use it more. So I think it helps, if that answers part of your question, and just engaging people in the data and letting them love it as much as we did, I guess.
Yep. Okay. Michael?
Thanks to Prue going first. It allowed me to compile my my thoughts on this really, really important topic. So let me cover it in a few ways. The first thing is, if you work with a new provider or just any technology provider, there's just foundational elements that just must be there out of the gate, right? So data security in Australia, does it pass, a range of important privacy tick boxes, and we went through the security team with St Vincent's. We've been through it with other hospitals and large Australian state government departments, and we're live with banks and so forth. So we've got good robustness in being able to how to manage that. It is worth mentioning that the sort of 2-man team out of a garage, or the 3-man team, startup, they can be exciting, but they won't have the maturity necessarily in understanding data protocols and managing that end to end. So it's more than just putting it in the cloud and flicking a switch and you've got security. Like there's a lot of sort of privacy pieces to think through. And so that usually comes from just, good maturity and experience in working with organizations where that's really, really important. So, from that point of view, that foundational element needs to be there. And I think that's important when you speak with any new provider. There's some things in the news with those QR codes. There's a bunch of cowboys, spinning up QR code apps, and they haven't got their privacy in order, and it's going to take a leak, and all of a sudden there's a bunch of issues. So we take that very seriously. The second one is reporting and alerts, and having the flexibility for that. So being able to say this site manager needs to see the data in this way, HQ needs to see it in this way. If someone's come through with a high temperature, we want an SMS to go to this site manager, or maybe we want it to trigger something in a nurse call. There's no point in having the data if it's not living and breathing and being used appropriately across the organization. And each person in the organization is going to need a different view, on that data. So setting that up, both at the beginning and working closely with you to make sure that you can tweak it is really important. So we can change, from our perspective, we've got the flexibility there to make all that happen. And then the third one is like layers of access. So who can access the data and how? And so it's going to be important to ensure that you may say, look, this site manager can only access the data here and can't access it over here. Or, if we've had this bit of feedback come in after a visit, who can reply, who can't, who needs to action it. And so user access, either with just, good user access that we have built in, or you may say, do you know what, we've invested in Microsoft Azure Active Directory and we want you to use our current authentication system. So being able to have the maturity for that, in which case it's important for the data to not be an island. So the data needs to play nicely with other systems that you have in place. So something that we've done with Pru is we actually have one of our data engineers spend a chunk of time, with St. Vincent's to have all the piping of data come into one place. And that's something that we've learned that's really important for residential aged care, is that you don't spin up a new data island, but that it really dances gracefully with the systems that you already have in place. So, syncing with Epicor if the resident management system's there, or, going over into your CRM and really being able to play nicely. And if the team doesn't have the resources, then, we can kind of, create some of those plug and plays. And that's really important with the data as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that, both of you. I guess the takeaway that I have here is that with regards to this project, there was already a thought out sense of the data framework underpinning all the services and activities that you're doing. So that's really good to know. On that issue of data islands, something came to mind when you mentioned that. So if you're working with an organization that already has a booking system in place, how do you integrate that data, or is there, first, is there scope to integrate that data, and how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, of course. I think, one of the things that we've learned, when we started early in the journey, if there's nothing in place, it's easy to cover all elements, right? Pre-booking, sign-in, contractor management, etc. So dancing gracefully means if there's something that's already been invested in, well, let's take a look at that. And if that's working, well, there's no point. But sometimes there will be redundancies, and maybe there's some cost savings there over time. Certainly, contractor management, or if there's already been investment on some tablets on site for a simple sign-on, but it doesn't have all the ability to change the regulation and take the temperature, well, then we have a buyback system where we'll buy back the hardware that you've already invested in and then put in the new one. So I think it's important to work work with systems where those systems make sense, and where you're offering something that genuinely is more appropriate for the new world than being able to manage what you have already. In terms of current pre-booking systems, there's no pre-booking system that we've seen that handles the changing restrictions and regulations, able to upload flu vaccination beforehand. Are kids allowed? Are they not allowed? How many per wing? This resident's already had a visitor. So a lot of pre-booking engines are fairly simple and sort of just dumb pre-booking engines, if you will. And if you want to keep that, that's fine, because maybe there's not as many restrictions. We'll take that into our system. If you want to upgrade the smarts of it, then it's pretty easy for us to upgrade the smarts of that as well.
Yep. Okay, then. There's a question that's come up here, and I'll just pose it to the both of you. How do you see a system like this play out, let's say, being applied in other aged care settings like home care, community living, independent living, within an NDIS context. How would you apply that into that?
I can briefly touch on this, and then Prue, if you like, at your layer. We've just recently launched with Calvary, actually, for their home care providers, and they've got about 1,200 home carers going out, and we're doing this all via text message. So an hour before their shift, they get a text message, cover the screening questions, and then it's also have the chance to capture their mood, how they're feeling, and change some of those questions. If the CEO could know anything this week, what would you want them to know? But also cover the compliance elements. So we think it's really interesting, where to support home carers and, digitizing some of those elements, both from a compliance perspective and, an optimization. NDIS, there's less restrictions. Obviously, things like flu vaccination and what have you aren't required, but we're speaking and we're already live with a range of NDIS providers and sort of keen to understand that space more. I think there's going to be a theme of, people that are who are vulnerable, and ensuring you understand who's visiting them and who and wow and when. And then in the future, hopefully soon, we'll have COVID vaccinations, and maybe there's a mix of different types of COVID vaccinations or brands or boosters that are required. So how are you able to capture that? And that's stored, either beforehand or during, as you're visiting, both in home or in, another disability, or assisted living scenarios. So we're sort of ready to take all that on and, have a bit of experience already. But, certainly if anyone's in that space and keen to have a conversation, we're all ears right now.
Okay.
Prue, you can maybe touch on if there's any sort of thoughts on the home care side, etc.
Yeah, I think for us, focus was just on the residential aged care from a visitor visitor booking perspective. But we have used Rate It to do those pulse checks with our staff that work in community and in our retirement villages. And we have also used Rate It to do some NPS. So not so much across, we haven't used obviously the booking system across our 3 service streams, but we've used Rate It to help with some of our CX integration.
Okay. All right then. Thanks for that. Prue, I'm just going to pick up on something that you said, that you mentioned in your presentation earlier on, and that's about iterating what you have right now and continuing that conversation with Michael's team and sort of improving the systems. I guess from when the project started, looking at things like teething issues, looking at things that were sort of surprises that you didn't anticipate. Hindsight's always clear. So if you were to look back in when the project started, what were some lessons that you and your team learned in going through this whole process?
I think I touched on one before. I think in terms of just making sure, we were surprised at how quick staff adapted to it, and equally as surprised at how quickly the families adapted to then the self-booking. So we thought that was going to be a whole lot harder than it was. So that's a win for us. One thing on reflection is just, if I had my time over, it's not forgetting that the changeover of staff at a facility level, don't assume that the person who was using the system at reception has handed over to that next person and taught them how to use it. Luckily, the system is very easy to use, but we've had to double back quite a lot of times and perhaps maybe worked on our onboarding a little better to get people to know how to use the functionality. But it's an classic example is because we get feedback instantly. I can already see where there's a new staff member because the feedback will be, why do I have to show my flu vaccination every time I arrive? That's a trigger of that person doesn't know how to use the flu vaccination part of the system. Then we ring them and explain to that staff member how to do it, and then that's solved. So it's a really lovely a learning that we didn't know we'd be able to fix things so quickly. So the challenge for us is probably just being able to have enough staff to jump on those bits of feedback quick enough. And as I mentioned, staff training, you just got to continue to do it because, there's always new tweaks and things within the system. Yeah, they're probably the standout ones. I'm sure I'll think of some brilliant ideas to tell you after this webinar, no doubt.
Okay. Well, look, I'll ask you one more question, and it's somewhat aligned to that. We'll save that for the last question. So we're sort of on the 40-minute mark. So I'll start winding the conversation down. We'll still have a little bit of time, so don't feel rushed to answer your questions. But Michael, first to you. Why did Zipline choose to dedicate specifically to age services? I mean, there are obviously lots of different industries and sectors that are out there. There are lots of things that are happening in this space in other sectors. Why age services for you?
I'm really glad you asked me that question, actually. And for those tuning in, was not pre-prepared. We made a really deliberate choice as a leadership team. I remember at the top of the pandemic, and as we started working with Pru, was that everyone, when you're building new technology, you get excited. Oh, we could use this at, like at schools, and we could use it at like cafes, and we could use it. And we purposefully went, no, like let's really know and go deep on residential aged care, because it's so nuanced. And as we continue to go down, it continue to become more nuanced, right? Like kids are allowed now, they're not allowed. And it really allows you to solve a problem in a way that's much deeper than just going very thin veneer, across horizontal. And we sort of knew that we could expand into other markets, later. But we had this mantra internally, which is like nail a niche, like let's nail this one thing and like let's do it really, really well. And that's proven to be extremely valuable as we speak with RAC providers that say, do you know what, we looked at 4 different visitor management solutions and we picked you guys because you understood RAC better than anyone else. You're committed to the industry, you know the depth of the problem, and we're often explaining problems, to providers that they're not even aware of that, since we roll out. And so, and then just the impact that we can get in residential aged care is so meaningful. Like the buzz on our side, as we see the feedback come through, and it's a bit of technology that's like legitimately taking a lot of stress off the plate of staff and visitors and residents know what's happening. So we're really committed to residential aged care. The other one that we're now moving into and have had traction in is within the hospital space. Knowing sometimes there may only be like one visit per patient, and kind of managing that process. So we're now live in across several hospitals. So we think that's interesting, and then the home care space. But we're purposely not jumping off this call and then going over to Coca-Cola, Amatel, and speaking about a generic sign-in, for their reception. Who knows, maybe in the future. But for now, we're really, really focused on aged care.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for that, Michael. So Pru, I'll let you finish off today's session. Aged care provider to aged care provider, what one piece of advice would you give with regards to what you've worked with at St. Vincent's thus far?
Aged care provider. So repeat the question.
So if you were to give a piece of advice, aged care provider to aged care provider,
sure.
With regards to what we've discussed today, going from anecdote to data to generating insight to designing services, and taking on board feedback and implementing that, what would be one piece of advice that you would give?
I would say absolutely do it, and don't be afraid of staff not embracing digital technology to make their lives easier. I think that's been our biggest takeaway, is there was assumption that the staff, very manual, hands-on, would need to do things a certain way. And it is kind of proved us wrong time and time again that don't be surprised. Staff actually want to make their own lives easier and the lives of their residents. So, I would absolutely 100% encourage people to embrace technology and digital transformation to make, aged care, which is a very, very complex industry, as easy as we can.
Fabulous. Thank you for that. I think that brings us to a very fitting end. So thank you very much for your insights on that, Pru. Michael, also thank you very much for both of you for making the time to do this. Really appreciate it. The comments and feedback that I received from the chat here has been really positive, and words like insightful, great presentation. So look, that's wonderful. warms the cockles of my heart to sort of read those
I noticed
things.
there were some specific questions we didn't get to. So if anyone wants to ping me directly, just michael@zipline.app, and we're more than happy to answer any specific geeky questions that we might not have gotten to.
Wonderful. Thank you. So everyone, and that brings us that brings today's session to a close. Once again, thank you for all of you for being here today, and also to Michael and Prue. I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday, where we'll be looking at capturing digital transformation's promise in home care with David Panter at ECH, Paul Grundy, and Doug Daly from KPMG Australia. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you once again for your company. See you. Bye.
Thanks, Mel.
Bye.
See you.